Good evening and welcome to another episode of A Real Point of View. Today I am joined by my co-host, Miss Karen D, the movie maven, and I'm your host, Greg Morgan, the real movie guy. Um, Tonight we are going to talk about, every once in a while, we probably pretty much talk about all kinds of movies, all different genres, different people and what they mean to film. And tonight's not going to be that different. But sadly, many cases we come across a special person with regard to film who has passed away. So tonight we're going to talk about one of those movie greats, a famous Italian movie director who has impacted American film as well. And a movie that I know when I was a child, I always wanted to see this movie as a young teenager. And then another movie that I thought was probably one of the I don't know, top 50 best movies ever. So why don't we go ahead and talk about this famed director, Karen? Who are we talking about today?
Oh, we're talking about Bernardo Bertolucci. He passed away on November 26th. He was, I believe he was like 77. And he is one of the most well-known directors. I would call him like a director's director, sort of. We know movie making is a director's medium, and the director has so much control over the product, and in retrospect, the actors have relatively little control over what's going on. I mean, that's a gross generalization, but you get the general point. And he became very well known as a writer and as a director. He wrote movie scripts. He wrote scripts for his own vehicles and for other people's vehicles. And, he just really distinguished himself because of the chances that he took in movie making. And so that's why, I thought it would be good to talk about him. The last film that he made was 6 years ago. And I don't believe it was released here. If it was, it had a very short window. And at the time of his death, he died of lung cancer. He was planning to do another movie, but that didn't happen. And before 2012, before that movie, and I'm trying to recall the name of that movie. Before that movie, I think it was pretty much some years before he had done anything that had become well known. The final film was called Me and You, and it was screened at the Cannes Film Festival and released in the UK. So it was not released in the United States. And before that, I can't remember the film that he did before that off the top of my head. But anyway, very, very interesting, director. He is most well known for The Last Emperor. And this was a very interesting movie. It was the only movie where he was given permission to film inside the Forbidden City in China, in Beijing. The Forbidden City's in Beijing, right? Okay. He was the only film and the only director given permission to film there. The movie was epic. and it was nominated for 9 Academy Awards. It won all 9 categories that it was nominated in. And I cannot, off the top of my head, recall any movie that has done that. But that one he did. And the film not only won the Oscar, it won the British Oscars, it won Golden Globes. It was very well accoladed, and it deserved to be, in my opinion. It was an amazing film. It was just breathtaking. So there's that film, but he's also known for The Last Tango in Paris in 1972 with Marlon Brando. That one might have been nominated for an Academy Award. Maybe Marlon Brando was nominated as Best Actor for that. But in that movie, it's not so much the brilliance of the directing, was just the subject matter, and that and the way in which he approached the subject matter of sexual encounters and relations between men and women, and with, of course, the women being objectified and victimized, and just that sort of exposure of that in 1972, when people weren't doing that in movies. It was shocking. So that really put Bernardo Bertolucci on the map with American audiences. And before, I think he was pretty well known in Italy, but certainly not here. He actually came from a family of some wealth, and his father was a very well-known poet in Italy, poet and writer. And he grew up in a very artistic family. His mother was very artistic, and of course his father was. And Bernardo Bertolucci showed quite a talent for writing at a very young age. And by the age of 15, he'd won quite a few awards for his writing for poetry and other writing that he had done. But he got a chance to work as an assistant on a friend of his father's movie. And when that happened, he got the film bug, and he decided he wanted to work in that medium and not work so much as a writer, although he kept using his writing skills, because he wrote a lot of his own material, and, like I said, material for other people too. So I've been sort of just I've been thinking off and on about what kind of impact, now that he's among the ages, what kind of impact did he have as a director? And I'm not quite sure, mainly because he's been out of a lot of the public eye for the last 6 years or so. When people think about directors, when they're talking about directors that are sort of capturing interest, trending, as it were, I mean, today in 2018, Bernardo Bertolucci is not going to immediately come to mind, I don't think. But at the same time, I think he's had a lasting impact on on what sorts of subject matters directors take on, and how they take them on. He was very outspoken in his political views, and he was not afraid to show that in his movies. He was a socialist. He was a Marxist. So some of his movies sort of explored that. He undertook sort of taboo subjects like incest and, nudity and, So yeah, he did that. Um, so, interesting. And I guess the other thing I would say that I've noticed is that, when we talk about like the typical great directors like Frank Capra or Alfred Hitchcock, you can name movie after movie after movie for which they're well known and, that captured box office or that, were sentimental favorites or whatever. I'm having a little more trouble with that as far as Bernardo Bertolucci is concerned. I mean, to me, it's sort of like almost like Ralph Ellison and The Invisible Man. Ralph Ellison wrote that one book, and that was it. But that one book was so amazing that, frankly, he didn't need to write any other books. So that was it. It's not. I mean, he wrote other essays, but I defy anybody to name the essays he wrote. But they could name The Invisible Man. I think for Bernardo Bertolucci, it's The Last Tango in Paris and The Last Emperor. He did The Sheltering Sky. He did
1900.
He did 1900 with Robert De Niro, which was probably, like another sweeping epic movie, but not terribly well received by the critics and incredibly long. It was over 5 hours long, the director's cut. Over 5 hours. And so,
It was the whole 1900.
Right. So when 1900 was shown in Europe, it was shown in like two parts because I guess people needed a break. I know I would. But in America,
But you got to take this into consideration. Music in Europe, especially early on, classical music always had interludes. It always had intermissions, and it always had more than one part. So how is this any different in showing the films in this very similar landscape? But that's not very Western.
Right. I mean, I recall the first time I ever saw Gone with the Wind, and it's a 4-hour movie.
Right.
So, we saw 2 hours of it, then there was a break, and then we went back for 2 more hours.
Mm-hmm.
But that's relatively unusual. And, and in America, I mean, for American audiences, Bertolucci had to really cut the film down. So like it was probably 2 hours and, probably on the large side of 2 hours, or 2 hours and quite a few minutes after that. But it certainly wasn't 5 hours. Wasn't a 5-hour movie for American audiences. But anyway, there are just a few movies, even though, there's some movies that were only released in Italy that we've never seen, whatever. But in terms of his legacy, in my mind, it's The Last Emperor first and foremost, The Last Tango in Paris, possibly 1900. And those are the key accomplishments.
It's interesting. Back in the 70s, I remember the hype of The Last Tango in Paris and how it was this forbidden movie, partially because of the fact that it showed so much nudity, and a very prominent actor in America was one of the focal points of the movie, which was Marlon Brando. And I, at that time, was a fan of Marlon Brando. I'd seen him in a few movies and was truly a fan. But that wasn't the case. That wasn't the reason why everybody was to see this movie, because it was, this R-rated movie that piqued people's imaginations and piqued their curiosity because of, as you alluded to, the sexual nature of it all. And it was a very flamboyant piece, and especially back in the 70s, where I know we were just coming off the flower child um, mentality, but at the same time, it was still relatively risque. But people flocked to the theaters to see it because it was exploring something that wasn't typical, we'll say, in many films. And it was love and French and Paris and all this wonderment. But um, uh, I, at the time, as a young person then, wasn't able to see it because I was actually too young to see it in the early 70s. But yet
Right.
you've always heard friends say they snuck and saw it, or their parents
Right.
took them to see it, and you're like, whoa, you know. And there were those movies that my dad, for example, took me to see that I was thinking like, whoa. And I'm sure mom wouldn't have let me see it, but you know, with my dad every once in a while to see some movies that were a little risque, but um, that wasn't the essence of the subject matter. But see, this was about French romance. And so, you know, people were like, ooh, hey, this is the thing to see. Um, I did finally get to see the film, and it really wasn't a bad movie. It was actually a decent movie. But at the same time, it was nowhere near the hype of the
Mm.
times. And again, as an older person, looking at a film that is a little bit younger or a little bit older, in how it's viewed at the time, um, it lost a little bit for me. But
Uh, uh, mm.
but in contrast, because it's a very huge contrast between that film and The Last Emperor, very different films altogether. Um, had I not known that he had done The Last Tango in Paris, I would have never thought he had done The Last Tango in Paris. Looking at this film, um,
Right. It would be hard to see that the same director did both of those movies. He also did Little Buddha with Keanu Reeves.
mhm.
Again, that, you know, I don't recall if that movie just like totally wowed the box office or, you know, garnered a lot of just like critical acclaim, you know, but
And Keanu Reeves wasn't a big name then.
right. I mean, this was 93 when
Yeah,
that movie came out. And then he also did Stealing Beauty, which was Liv Tyler's um, debut movie role.
hmm
Um, and The Sheltering Sky had Deborah Winger,
right.
who I just think I've always loved her as an actress. I just thought she was awesome as an actress. But The Sheltering Sky, I mean, even just trying to go through like a plot summary was like, oh my God, this is really weird. And just, you know, I mean, I don't think it wouldn't keep me in my seat very long. So I go, okay, these are just like weird people who doing their weird things. And, you know, I don't really need to watch. I don't need to know. It's like, you know, it's like whatever. Um, and Besieged, which was actually a movie that I really
And
enjoyed because Tandy Newton starred in it, and I just loved Tandy Newton. And I remember going to the movies to see that. Besieged came out in 1998, so that movie was 20 years old. But that got skewered by the critics. Um, in the United States anyway, it was just like, oh my God, what a horrible movie, what a waste of time. But you know, whatever. But then he did The Last Emperor.
so let's dissect The Last Emperor for a moment. Here's a guy who's made movies for decades, and yet we're more interested in something which one of his later pieces because it truly shows um, film excellence. You know, um, as you alluded to, 9 nominations, 9 winners of an Academy Award. That's phenomenal in any right. So, what's so phenomenal? What's so wonderful about this movie? Obviously, it being filmed in Beijing, which is one of the beautiful cities in China. Obviously, being filmed in old China, technically, but the beautiful surroundings of this young man's life as being the last emperor of China, truly an emperor who was not a emperor of power, obviously still influence, obviously still important enough to the surrounding countryside, but yet not in power. Um, Dealing with what I guess even royals now in other countries deal with, but even more so in this situation, not being able to influence anything. And that in itself is an interesting motif when we're looking at this film, because as a small child, he was pampered. I mean, you would thought that he was just everything, and yet he was more of a symbol as opposed to a true ruler. That's important to know and important in the film as he gets older and develops into a mature person. Um, that was intriguing and that was interesting to me. But also too aesthetically, some of the more beautiful things of nature and things that are surrounding him, and living in this part of the quote unquote palace area. Um, what was it about the film for you, Karen, that intrigued you?
I I've just was stunned at the way that Bertolucci interwove the changes taking place in the world, in China and in the world, and the changes and how they were reflected in the changes that took place in this man's life, a man who was an emperor, but who was also a man who, enjoyed great luxury, but also, like you said, he was a symbol. He was a symbol of a ruler, but not really a ruler. And the luxury that came with being the emperor came at a great cost, because he was essentially he was a prisoner of the role that he was forced to play. And it brought great cruelty into his life and also caused him to be cruel. Mm-hmm. But I mean, because he was the emperor, I mean, he was literally snatched from his mother as a newborn, literally snatched, and brought to this, to the Forbidden City, which is, this vast place of all these people that are there with only one function, which is to serve him, the emperor. But at the same time, I mean, when he was a kid, like 12 years old, his mentor and his counselor, who's played by Peter O'Toole, who's just amazing in that movie, gave him a bicycle, which was a really new machine at that time. And, Puyi, who's the emperor, loved this bicycle. And he desperately wanted to ride it outside of the Forbidden City. He wanted to take a ride. He wanted to see things. He couldn't leave. And there was just this one poignant part of the movie where this child is trying to leave, mainly because he wants to go to his mother's funeral. His mother had died. And he still remembered his mother, even though he literally had been snatched from her. He still remembered his mother, and he wanted to go to the funeral. And the powers that be, because he was not the power. He was not the power. He was the emperor. But the people who ran the Chinese government ran him, and their answer was no. They would not let him leave. And it was just so sad, you know. And I don't know. I just find it fascinating the way that, you know, you have this life, and then there are all of these events that alter your life in ways in which you could never imagine. He was, like I said, born into great wealth, but he also experienced great poverty. He had the Forbidden City as his own personal playground, but he also spent time, but it felt like a prison to him. And then he actually spent time in prison. I think he wanted to be a great man, but he also, it's almost like, it's almost like although he tried to be a great man, there were just this incredible convergence of events that sort of conspired to keep him sort of stymied, is the word I'm looking for. And then you also just have this situation where the world is saying, okay, you are the emperor, you're the supreme ruler, and we're only here to serve you. But the truth is that whole structure was becoming completely irrelevant by the time Puyi came along. The world was changing so much, and emperors, I mean, it's like, like how they say $1 million should stay in $1 million. It's not what it used to be. Well,
Right.
being an emperor wasn't what it used to be either.
Right.
So all of the things that he was promised, that he thought would be part and parcel of being emperor, including having influence over the welfare of his own people, no, that was vaporware. That didn't exist because of the massive way in which the world was changing, especially China. And, so he was just tortured with, I think, irrelevancy. Mm-hmm. and also just trying to figure out what is his place in the world, in this world, a world that he didn't even really get the chance to understand. Telling that story, I just thought was amazing because it was told with majesty, grandeur, beauty, but also with like an unflinching eye about, let's examine what it really means to be emperor. Mm-hmm. Let's examine what it really means when you have all this money, when people tell you you have power, but you're really irrelevant. Let's examine what it means when your whole world, is taken over by a completely different government that has no use for you. And then you become its own political prisoner and you were the emperor. What does that, how do you function like that? Well, and these are the things that the movie explored. And I just thought Bertolucci did it brilliantly. And the way in which he achieved this brilliance to me was in the way that he juxtaposed all of this grandeur. The shots of the Forbidden City, the cinematography was just amazing. And that won an Academy Award. Mm-hmm. But, you have to just the scenes, you go from like stark, poverty to the Forbidden City, which is just jaw-dropping in its, scope. And at the same time that you have all this grandeur, you also have Bertolucci telling what is essentially, this amazing story, but he tells it in a very simple way, without a lot of flourishes or without a lot of, sort of setups or whatever. It's just, here here is this emperor who is also this man. Let's, and he told this story, but the way in which he approached the storytelling, juxtaposed with the grandeur of the circumstances, just made for, I think, an amazing film.
So what do you think? Do you think the powers that be kept him in the city so that the true subjects would not find a way to embrace this man and actually make him more powerful than he would have been? I often thought that. Keeping him from what's really going on in the world keeps him from gaining any foothold in not just society in general, but in his society and surroundings. And, even though the people are like, oh, yes, the emperor, but to see the emperor, to have the emperor really be there, be out there amongst the people, might have garnered him more support, and maybe the powers that be were threatened by that.
To me, I guess I always thought it was just more of a matter of wanting to keep him pure, like the emperorship pure, because the emperor ruled over the people, but was not of the people. And I got the impression that, at least from the Forbidden City standpoint, the emperor was considered almost a deity. Right. I mean, when the emperor was, when Puyi was a toddler, I'll never forget this scene because it was just so strange. But in those days, they didn't have indoor plumbing. So they had chamber pots, which, was kind of normal for royalty. But there's this one scene where, this toddler, he's, using the bathroom, using the chamber pot, and the servants, take the chamber pot and cradle it as if it's something sacred and sniff, like take a big whiff, because that's supposed to show how much they embrace this ruler. And that's kind of crazy. But but it's like, I guess you do that with a god, but you don't do that with a normal person. No matter how much you care about them, you're not going to like smell their poo, and stick your face right in there and smell that poo. No, you're not going to do that. That's crazy. But that's what they did, and, so just these strange customs to me just sort of meant that they were treating him as if he was a deity. And so him getting, sort of being out and among people would just sort of eliminate that illusion. Because it truly was an illusion, because the man was no deity. None of them were.
No, it's man, just people. Yeah, interesting film. I guess when we have people of such notoriety, especially for this film, and then yet other films didn't really catch your eye and didn't really catch your interest, it makes it very interesting indeed, because, how did this come about? What made this so interesting to him to really want to direct this film? And it's like he went from, a maker of films to this great project, this big, humongous thing that had everything about it was wonderful and marvelous. And, not saying he did have awards here and there, but this was just, I mean, everything. What was that like for him?
Yeah,
I wonder.
I would wonder too. Yeah, because I don't think the films that followed the Last Emperor were, they certainly didn't approach the greatness that the Last Emperor had.
And I often wonder about things like that for people who have gained such wonderful success, and how hard it is to follow that up with it and as good or an equal or better project. But yet that's always what's expected. This was wonderful. What's next? And that in many cases that does not come to pass, and in his in life did not come to pass. But yet you have that moment, that situation, that you are able to express yourself as a director and express the essence of what you feel and hope the screenwriter and or novelist is trying to express in the story itself. And especially in this case, a very vivid recollection of this historical figure, really.
Yeah, I mean, and that movie took 3 years to be made, which
in these days is rare that you see that movies take so long. They're usually spitting them out real fast these days, and 3 years is that takes a while.
I mean, it might take 3 years to get a movie, to get the green light to make a movie. That's easy. It could take 10 years, could take 15 or 20 years. But once the cameras start rolling, you usually don't get 3 years.
Right.
You hope you get 3 weeks. But this movie, literally from the day the camera started rolling, it was 3 years. But given the story that was being told and where it was being filmed, and you would need 3 years to do that justice. I mean, I think he did the subject matter justice, and not just the life of Puyi, but also what life was like in China, the changes that China was facing as a country were pretty amazing, just wide-ranging, changes. It was almost like China, the country, was being buffeted between the past and the present,
mm-hmm.
and the future, back and forth, and China wasn't sure where to land. That too was interesting. The birth of the Communist Party, Mao Zedong coming to power, which happened right at the time that Puyi, it was long after Puyi stopped being emperor. He basically, they got rid of all of those vestiges and went for communism as their form of government, and he's, it was, just very interesting shift.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, to take that on, wow. And to do it so well is just, I think, a remarkable achievement, a remarkable directorial achievement.
To say the least.
And so, I mean, really, for those of us for those of our friends who are listening, it's like, if you haven't seen this movie, look at this movie. If you can see it on a big screen, try to see it on a big screen, because the shots are just so amazing. The establishing shots, the close-ups, the the scenery, the lighting, so many things just came together to just create a really beautiful picture. And I remember going to the movies to see it, and I'm so glad I did, because it really, you could see it on a little screen, and I've seen the movie more than once, so I saw it on a little screen. I think I've seen twice. The other two times I've seen it, but the first time I saw it, it was on at least what passed for a big screen in 1987. And I'm really glad I saw it that way, because it just, oh wow, it's just breathtaking.
Yeah, I think if you find a movie that is an epic film, you'll really want to see it on the big screen if you're able to do that. Now, our audience may not be able to do that at this point, but you never know. Every once in a while, there's a screening somewhere on a big screen with regard to certain films, and maybe this is a film that garners that type of respect and ability to be seen on a big screen at some point in the near future. But even if you've got a big screen TV, yeah, you'll enjoy the vividness of all the colors and the aesthetics of this film. It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, it's getting about that saber-tooth time. We thank you for watching us here on A Real Point of View, and we hope to bring you more shows about epic films and epic directors. So thank you again for watching us here on A Real Point of View. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and make sure you get out there and see a good movie, and definitely take this into consideration. The Last Emperor was special.
And so was Bernardo Bertolucci as a movie director. He will be missed.
Indeed. Homage to Mr. Bertolucci. Well, thanks again for watching. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next time here on A Real Point of View. Check us out on our YouTube channel, and check out some of our archive shows. There's a lot of interesting information out there. Thanks again, and take care, everybody.
Night.
Night.